All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Village of Shorewood Plan Commission to order. With us this evening, we have Trustee McGovern, Commissioner Klein, Commissioner Pollock, and Commissioner Wickland. Commissioner Flynn Post and Commissioner Clay
Clone, but I think
Clone.
that's also probably not accurate.
Are excused this evening. The item 2, approval of April 22nd, 2025 Plan Commission meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Motion approved. Second.
Okay, motion to approve by Commissioner Wickland, seconded by Trustee McGovern. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved as presented. Item 3, further discussion and possible recommendation of a request by zoning petition to amend the regulation of permitted principal uses detailed in 535-25 of the Village of Shorewood zoning code to allow commercial kitchens in the P1 public and semi-public district. The agenda is split into 3 steps under this agenda item: an overview, public comment, and then plan commission discussion and possible recommendation. So I believe, is there anyone joining online?
No one is joined online.
Okay, well, for the benefit of Commissioner Wickland, I will ask Director Griepentrag to provide the overview of the matter.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as we discussed last Plan Commission meeting in April, we have a request on file from the North Shore Presbyterian Church to amend the zoning permitted uses within the P1 district, specifically to allow commercial kitchen type uses. Just for your reference, this is the village's use table, which shows the P1 district does not allow manufacturing and production, artisan manufacturing and production, which is where those uses are currently located, which is the reason for their request. The item overview, once again, commercial kitchens are currently allowed as artisan production, which is defined as uses that produce consumer goods by hand, including confections, bakeries, caterers, and custom-made food items, amongst other uses within that category. The requested amendment is related to the use of their unused commercial kitchen, which they would like to invest in to allow entrepreneurs to rent the space out from them. Their application notes that it would benefit both them to ensure their long-term viability, as well as small businesses in the area. The applicant has requested specifically to allow commercial kitchens in the P1 district as a permitted use. It would impact the entire P1 district, which for your reference is highlighted here with the red circles. So that's all school district properties, Village of Shorewood properties, including the police department, Village Hall, Department of Public Works, the North Shore Fire Department, as well as the other 3 religious institutions in the village, Kingo, St. Robert's, and the Lutheran Church. So that's all the P1 district. We were asked as part of the review to confirm consistency with the comprehensive plan, which once again is defined as consistent with to mean furthers or does not contradict the objectives, goals, and policies contained in the comprehensive plan. In addition, the state statute defines a comprehensive plan as a guide to the physical, social, and economic development of a local government unit. Finally, section 661001-2MA states that the enactment of a comprehensive plan by its ordinance does not make the comprehensive plan itself a regulation. So once again, the regulations are in the zoning chapter, not in the comprehensive plan itself. With respect to the identified uses of the institutional district within which this church and other P1 districts are identified, the comprehensive plan notes that this land use designation is intended to permit public buildings, schools, places of worship, and clubs. The future land use map generally shows existing locations of such facilities. Community facilities may also be located in areas planned for mixed-use residential or business uses where appropriate. So once again, the question is, does the request further or does not contradict the objectives, goals, and policies? Within my staff report, I've indicated that it's my perspective as staff that it does not contradict those particular uses. Up for discussion and direction tonight. So if recommended, if the Plan Commission recommends the request to the Plan Commission, there are 3 options within your plan within the packet that could be considered. Should a category be created related to food production, which is directly in response to their request, Or should we consider all artisan production to be added with limited retail options, which is what was discussed at last meeting? There was also a request to expand it to include other uses, so I added all GX uses within option 3. Or is there another version or amalgamation that the Plan Commission would like to recommend or consider? And then if the use should be added, should it be added as a permitted or conditional use? If a conditional use, what types of hours of operation, location, retail sales, distribution, or consumption standards would you like to see within that? As a matter of reference, the Plan Commission introduction happened April 22nd. We are here for a possible recommendation on May 27th. We did, presuming that a recommendation could be made, we did schedule a public hearing for June 16th, at which time the village board could consider the update. I would like to ask if Barbara Kiley Miller, can you see my slides? Because I know last meeting I did not advance them accurately.
No, it's still on the title page.
Okay, I will try to fix that. Sorry. But that is the introduction to the item for discussion tonight.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions about the overview? All right, so seeing none, we would close 3A and move on to 3B. Are there members of the public who would like to be heard this evening? I know that there are some people who were here last month, and I would say that there wouldn't be a need to repeat comments that had been made previously, but if there are updates that you want to provide, I would certainly welcome those. Okay, thank you for being on hand. Ms. Kiley Miller, would you like to be heard on this matter this evening? Is there anything?
Nope, just
okay.
following, thanks.
Thank you. All right, with that, I will close 3B and move on to 3C, Plan Commission discussion and possible recommendation. Because there were a couple of different discussion points that were on the last slide, if we could reference that. For the purposes of clarity, I would like to take these one at a time just to see where the body is before we attempt a recommendation. So should a category be created related to fruit production? That is the question, the predominant question that we are being asked to consider this evening. There were subsequent questions that could be considered as well. Should this include all artisan production with limited retail? Should all GX uses be allowed? Other. So I guess what I would like to know is kind of where the body is on the first matter before we consider broadening it. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we could go around the room, I can just say that I'm in support of adding the category related to food production in the manner that it was presented.
And I am also.
I am as well.
That was up for me. Also for me.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to see all artisan production be added with limited retail options?
Yes.
Mr. Klein?
Yeah, I'd just like to see more flexibility overall.
Agreed. Same here.
Okay. I am not as comfortable with that, but I'll open it for discussion and see where I land. Should all GX uses be allowed? I believe Commissioner Pollack, this was your.
Yeah. It should. I'm interested in learning more about what you're concerned about by extending to all artisan production.
Mhm.
So learn more about your concerns, and then we can see if there's any additional concerns if we expand aperture.
Okay.
I'd also be fine to list the GX uses if that's helpful for the conversation. They are in the packet, but if you need them, I can list them. If you want to go back to the other use, that's fine as well.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to see? Oh, yeah, let's read those uses. They were in the packet, but
So the additional GX uses would include consumer services, which is like salons, things of that nature. Limited eating and drinking places. The limitation refers to the amount of floor plan that they can occupy within the building. Funeral and mortuary services, lodging, limited artisan and manufacturing production. Once again, that's a percentage of the overall floor plate. Medical and dental clinics and offices, and limited general retail sales. Once again, limited based on the square footage.
Other leanings, of course, we can open it for discussion, but
I would lean in favor of this. I think it'd be good to have, additional businesses if there's interest. I kind of have a feeling this is more just hypothetical. We'd be leaving it open to other uses. I don't envision a big land rush or anything like that. But I just think, we have these spaces here existing in Shorewood. It's always nice if you can bring in a little extra small business, especially if it's in a place that's, kind of right on the edge of residential. Just, I think historically we've kind of gone too far in the direction of keeping restaurants and bars and things like that out of strictly residential zoning. A lot of the really nice older neighborhoods in the Milwaukee area have kind of a little bit of a mix of additional businesses in residential areas. So I think even if it's not zoned residential, I think it kind of goes in the right.
yes.
With respect to the hypothetical portion of Trustee McGovern's comments, I did reach out to all other churches at the school district and did not receive any request or discussion of if they wanted to expand it themselves. So this could once again be a limited application in front of us. That being said, the village did also issue an RFP for the use of the former North Shore Health Department space within the village center. That is also zone P1. So once again, depending on who wants to use that space, we could be here again with another zoning modification if it doesn't match what's currently allowed in the district. So this could be a preemptive discussion in favor of a potential use there. But once again, I don't see a large scale need of applicants wanting to open up the space. So it could be just, based on limited applications.
Mm-hmm. I think in general, my hesitancy comes from proceeding too quickly, I guess. For me, the use of a kitchen that is largely a commercial kitchen, it's built for high volume, allowing food production to occur in that, allowing the owner of that building, that public entity to negotiate that and to regulate that with, said business owners makes complete sense and is very compatible. I think some of the, in terms of the limited retail options, again, I guess, yeah, there isn't any, still, it would be regulated through other means, in terms of a tenant agreement. So I guess there's limiting there that can self-limit that can happen there. I guess I would prefer to see us approve the first condition or first category, and then I would prefer to be back to respond to another application similar to the way that we did for, now this is the second one, in the way that it's like challenging our code and being market driven. But I can't come up with anything concrete.
I'm sorry, do you mind if I?
Yes, please.
Aren't all these, or the majority of the P1, can you go back? I'll look at it together. Aren't these all institutions that have a fair bit of additional oversight already? Schools, churches, like
Exactly.
it's not
So,
like,
yeah,
that's what I'm like,
we're
I trust our
right
neighbors,
to
right?
be able to regulate. Yep.
A little bit. That's why I'm like, and we're allowing stuff that is literally possible 50 feet away anyway. And
Good
so I'm like,
point.
hey, this seems, it seems needlessly complicated from my perspective, but I can understand.
Sold.
Okay.
Thank you. That's exactly what I need. I just need to talk it through with my peers. Okay, so is there any further discussion?
on any of those topics.
Mm-hmm.
I did think like the expanded one when we say like salon and stuff, it did kind of hurt my head a little.
Mm-hmm.
Like the commercial kitchen makes sense. And by the way, I'm not talking about putting any at all. I'm all for most of this, but when we say the other GX uses, I'm kind of like, well, again, these are all
Consumer service.
I'm not opposed to it. Just for discussion. I mean, these spaces, these are compared to their neighbors that might be right next door. These,
This I don't. I'm
no.
not sure that. What are you trying to get?
Well, no, I'm
Okay.
just trying to see, it's just, there's a different competitive advantage too, if you start opening it up. I understand the commercial kitchen space and underutilized and people want to use that. You know, that goes back to the question later, if it's a conditional or permitted use to it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but
I appreciate, oh, go ahead.
I just,
I appreciate that because I feel like a kitchen it's a unique set of tools and equipment and space that operates in a certain way. And it is very cost prohibitive for somebody to recreate that themselves. But services that and businesses that can be run out of essentially an office space, when we have so much office space, there's part of me that without talking to the bid or getting other aspects of input, I feel like is a little bit, it's not a necessary step that we need to take. And I agree that it's overly cumbersome from a regulation and a use perspective. But given that we have 2 square mile or 2 miles of commercial district with, empty spaces and things like that, that I think it would be fair to limit it as well. And I guess I would make a note for whatever happens coming out of here, if it does go to the village board, we should seek input from the business district.
yeah, I'm just looking at the best way to handle, look at the list there too, because when you go to lodging, right? I mean, maybe they have some lodging available that used to be housing for something else.
Mhm.
You know, again, sense amount for that. Have office, sure, if you make an office. But again, the list seems eating and drinking place. Sure. Sure. I don't know.
Do you think the public schools are gonna, like, when we look at this map, it's churches and schools. They're largely,
I'm starting to think creatively in my head now, so I don't know. I'm not opposed to any of it. I'm just bringing this stuff up because that was the only part, looking at that list, that's where I was like, well, it does seem a little goofy, but also do I think it's going to be an issue?
And I do think for the purposes of this is going to go for public hearing and to the village board. So for the purposes that showing thoughtful discussion, I think is reasonable, even if we all agree, right? Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with going slower. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
why we'd want to slow this.
Mm-hmm.
We can do it incrementally if you like.
Mm-hmm. So I think at whatever point discussion ceases, I would certainly entertain a motion, and it can include all these, and it can always be amended at the village board. Our job tonight is to issue a recommendation.
Dan suggests I make a motion. I'm gonna take him up on that.
Okay.
I didn't whisper on purpose. It just happened.
Mhm.
Is there a recommended motion, Bart?
There are 3 options,
Right.
all
Nine.
associated with the three different uses.
What's in the
Page 9 and 10 of the packet.
joke? I'd like to make a motion.
So the
Uh,
Yep.
yeah.
The first one is the as requested. The second one is artisan, and the third one would be all GX uses.
Can I make a motion for all 3 simultaneously? I move to recommend that the village board consider adding commercial kitchens as a permitted use within the P1 public and semi-public district. And as well as I recommend that the village board consider adding artisan manufacturing and production as a permitted use within the P1 public and semi-public district. And lastly, I also recommend that the village board consider adding the entire list of the GX uses. Do you want me to list them out? Or consumer
If you say as in the staff report, I can.
as in the
definitely-
staff report on page.
I will just add that was my intention of including 3 wasn't to get 3, but I don't know if it's wrong to do 3. So yeah, I mean, if you do the third option, the first and second aren't necessary because they're included. So it's
Right.
kind of like building on itself. So I was hoping that we would, as the body, recommend our preference to the village board, and I would still present all 3 options to the village board, but I was kind of looking for what the plan commission as the recommending body of zoning regulations would prefer. But by default, if you're okay with the third one, I would suggest that that would be where you're at. So
I'll withdraw my
No.
motion and we can do this better.
was gonna
Sorry.
say,
Yeah, I
so
would say-
procedurally, I'm not sure.
Procedurally, I think it would be accurate to what reflects, the motion that reflects your position sounds like number 3, and that it would include 2 and 1.
Correct. And if
Yeah.
that would fail, then you could go to number 2.
Exactly.
Okay, because it sounded like your concern is you wanted to have options to take it incrementally. My mistake.
Yeah, no.
I apologize.
Thank you.
Okay, well then
That's
I will,
okay.
can I try again?
I appreciate
Absolutely.
being considered.
I move to recommend that the village board consider adding consumer services, limited eating and drinking places, funeral and mortuary services, lodging, artisan manufacturing and production, medical, dental, clinical offices, and limited general retail sales as permitted within the P1 public space and semi-public. Your satisfaction?
So there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Pollak, seconded by Trustee McGovern. Further discussion?
Yeah, another question, Bart. So with the permitted use of, do you have any, I know that was one of the things on there, permitted or conditional. Did you have a recommendation on that?
In discussion last meeting, I don't know if I had a recommendation on it, but I would definitely lean towards permitted unless for some reason you have a desire to condition the hours operation, the location, or retail sales, distribution, or consumption. I did not hear that last meeting. And so
Yeah,
I kind of informed the plan commission unless you have those conditions to make it permitted, because otherwise it's not clear why it would be conditional.
thank you.
Any other discussion? All right, hearing none. This is just a voice vote, correct? All right. I think, I will vote no for the purposes of discussion at the village board, seeing that we have 2 members here. So I'm just saying that. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay?
Nay.
Oh.
'Cause I want to stay to the artisan.
You,
So the motion was to go all the way to the GX. And I was thinking we'd go to the artisan.
oh, and not go all
Yeah,
the way
and
to
not all
GX.
the way to the GX.
I'm sorry. Okay.
And I can
So-
reflect that in the notes and the moving
Okay.
forward, the memos.
Yeah,
So it's 3 to
It's 3
2.
to 2. so-
Okay. Apologize if I did not, but allow enough discussion.
No, that's
for-
fine.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that concludes that item. And we can move on to our next item of business, which is continued discussion of, what's the wording of it? I'm trying to find it.
Did the applicant have any questions? Thank you. Yep, we'll be in touch regarding the June 16th meeting.
Mhm. All right, so our next item is further discussion of the Plan Commission's proposed initiative to increase housing opportunities in the village. This is meeting number 2. Last time we reviewed the staff report. And there is some additional information that starts on page 28. of the packet. Do you want to update us on that?
Yeah, so I'd actually, if we can be a little more casual within this one, since this is the Plan Commission's initiative, I would like to receive a little more direction on anything else you'd be looking for. And so within the packet, I did provide background information, facts, data, as it were, with respect to the 4 options that were identified for future discussion. And so those items are grounded in the reference materials that were previously provided, and former recommendations of whether that's the comprehensive plan, the market study, equity and zoning policy guide, or enabling better places guide. Just as a refresher, the items were bedrooms and basements, which are currently prohibited, household definition, accessory dwelling units, and duplex restrictions in the R6 district. And so once again, I have more information in there. I did receive some feedback asking for more policy-based information with respect to them, which is something that I typically don't provide unless asked or directed. So once again, I provided a very basic referential set of facts behind each of these. I have them all prepared as slides if you want to go through them. I also heard that perhaps we might not want to do all 4 simultaneously. So I guess if you want to hear any or all of them tonight, I'd be happy to show you what I have with respect to what's in the packet and receive direction on them individually or how that needs to go. So it's kind of a many-pronged initiative. It's not as direct as many other initiatives that I work on are, where there's, one end goal here. There's 4 that have been currently identified. So I just want to make sure that I'm working with you all to understand what information you would need to make a recommendation to the village board. It might not be a lot more than what's in here now, or it might be extensive engagement or attorney opinions, things of that nature. So if you'd like to provide that, or I could continue through my slides, just didn't want to go through them if that's not necessary.
I appreciate that. I would lean towards, since they're prepared, going through the slides and getting an initial read from the group in terms of what additional information might be requested. And I would say moving forward, Trustee McGovern, I can't remember, were you here at the previous meeting?
No.
My thought about these were the Plan Commission can work at whatever rate it wants to simultaneously, one at a time. But I think we should only bring one at a time to the village board at a time, because we take action on such a wide range of issues and topics that use and code it's just a different, it's good to just focus in on something to consider all those angles, I guess. So with that, why don't we go through the slides and take a temperature of the room and some direction, and then we can go from there.
Okay. And if you're okay with it, feel free to ask me questions as we go on so we don't lose it, 3 topics down the line. But there also was discussion last meeting to make sure that we ground these actions within previously identified goals. And so as a refresher, in your packet as well as on the screen are housing goals identified in the comprehensive plan. One of the goals is to have a diverse housing market with respect to housing sizes and types, owner occupancy and tenancy, and household types and demographics that respects a balance, retaining existing housing stock and community members, and attracting and developing the next generation. The recommendation within the objective of that is to review and update zoning codes with respect to housing standards and types, including co-housing and accessory dwelling units. So pretty specifically recommended in the comprehensive plan to look at those 2 items. Secondly, there's a goal identified to have a community with updated housing regulations and financial policies that is responsive to the opportunity for develop within areas susceptible to change in relations to its housing goals. A recommendation within there, once again, is to review and update zoning codes with respect to housing standards and types, including co-housing and accessory dwelling units. So we have had previous public engagement and feedback that says these are things that the Plan Commission and Village Board should be looking at. So I don't have issues with further identifying them. They are grounded in existing goals. The other 3 topics are, once again, they're housing regulations that just need to be confirmed and updated. So I do believe with respect to that request that we are working within the boundaries that the comprehensive plan has set for us. The first one to be discussed perhaps is a household definition, which is currently morphed into the following. An individual or any number of persons related by blood, marriage, legal adoption or legal guardianship, or a group of not more than 3 adults of any relationship, plus minor children related by blood, adoption, or documented responsibility, living together in a dwelling unit, except as provided under state statute 6223(7)(I). The foregoing definition of household may not be used or applied to prohibit or restrict the following, which includes community living arrangements, foster homes, and adult family homes. So over the years, this has gone from a rather simple, straightforward definition to, referencing state statutes and looking at the number of people living in a unit and their relationship status. As I mentioned in our packet, that definition first appeared in 1956, at which time it was listed to prohibit more than 2 unrelated individuals. So once again, we've now expanded that to 3. But for reference, the first definition that I was able to find appeared in 1937 when it said 1 or more individuals living, sleeping, cooking, and eating together on the premises as a single housekeeping unit, whether related to each other by birth or not. And so initially, it just defined, the household as a unit, and then it got more specific as to what was allowed within that unit. As I mentioned, our code also does have minimum space requirements. So if the intention of adopting a household standard was to, provide adequate space for those living within the unit, that's actually covered elsewhere, where it says every room used for sleeping purposes by more than 2 occupants shall be required to have an additional 40 square feet of floor area for each additional occupant thereof, subject to the basic requirements as established under the provisions of 225(7)(D) of this code, which once again goes back to household. So if overcrowding were the actual purpose or goal of the definition of household, it is covered elsewhere. And so I don't have an answer to when it was expanded in 1956 as to why it was done within a larger code update. I presume that was zoning, standards of the day to include that. At some point, it was expanded from 2 to 3. I'm guessing that was done based on a desire to not enforce it as strictly. But as a response, the APA's American Planning Association's Equity and Zoning Guide does recommend that communities replace zoning references to family with a definition of household that includes all living arrangements that function as a household living unit, or define residential units without reference to family or household. So the equity and zoning practice says we probably shouldn't be asking people what their relationship is, and we should be focusing on what is adequate for life, health, safety of the residents within that unit. So as my leaving off point, I would look for next steps in terms of whether or not you would like additional discussion, information, or is there direction to proceed with drafting an ordinance. I would definitely get the opinion of the village attorney to make sure that I'm not missing something in case law that perhaps, provided reason for the village to adopt that definition. Once again, the APA's zoning guide doesn't seem to believe that there's a legal basis for needing it. Is there more public engagement that we would like to have? Or would you like to see a draft of the recommendation or other? So this is kind of, to me, just really dealing with the definition and how it impacts the code elsewhere.
Can you take a question here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when does it go from a bunch of people living together to co-housing? What is that? I see a statute called, is people like apply to be co-housing?
So yeah, there, and I'm not a housing expert, but the CDA did have a co-housing developer come to our CDA meeting, I believe in March, at which point she clarified for me that co-housing is not an actual term within either zoning or legal occupancy status. Co-housing is defined as living in an individual unit but sharing common spaces. So a co-housing development would be like a condo where you own your own space and then you go to a shared kitchen or a shared tool room or a shared workshop. And so she at that meeting convincingly told me that we would not need to update anything within our zoning code to allow for co-housing to happen. It's more of we would need to have a developer propose development and ensure that it meets other regulations such as setback, height, lot coverage. So she said if we would approve a condo, we would approve co-housing. That's as simple as it got. So in my memo, I tried to clarify that although it's been discussed, I think it's been discussed with confusion to what co-housing actually is. And so we would not need, in my current opinion, to update anything to allow co-housing because we currently have condos within the village that have shared, common spaces.
Bert, if we got rid of the household definition right now, how many more people could come live in Shorewood? Like, what's the impact here? I read your report and I'm still struggling with that.
It would be
connection?
based on the minimum space requirement. So we would have to know how many bedrooms are in a unit. And so if there are, larger, say 3 or 4 bedroom houses that have empty nesters in there that have 3 or 4 units, they technically could allow people to live in those units without being related. Because right now you're limited at no more than 3 others. I also put in my report, we do not, it's next to impossible to enforce this unless we get a complaint.
Mhm.
We did enforce it this past year when we received, I don't know if it was a complaint, but we received notice that there were, individuals living within a 2-bedroom apartment above 4 people. And so the landlord was actually unaware that that was, with respect to minimum space. And so the landlord was happy to resolve it for us. I don't honestly remember how that came into our office, but it was the one time that I can remember it happening. So we don't enforce this. We have no reason to know or understand who's living in a unit.
Right.
You don't apply for occupancy for residential status. You don't tell us when you have another child or when an aunt is visiting, things of that nature. So it's kind of one of those things on the books that I'm hesitant to have on the books because it's one of those things that someone's expecting us to enforce that I can't.
Okay.
And so to me, if overcrowding would be a problem, I would look at the space requirements. But to that same household of 3 or 4 bedrooms, if it was filled with, an 8-child household, which might have been the case in 1950, and it's not the case anymore, is that a problem? And that would be a policy question that I would need to understand either from yours or the board's perspective. Once again, I would like to discuss this with the village attorney to understand why we've gone this far in this direction and why us and others haven't, completely just gone backwards to it. Yeah, you would be opening it up to more residents living here in untraditional quote unquote living arrangements that perhaps some people would define as co-housing.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
to
other-
trust, to President McKegg's point, I'm also in no rush to get us to, a decision. So I would like to take as much time as we need on this. So
Mhm.
if there is hesitancy, if there's questions like this, I'm happy to feel them out.
Yeah, I'm interested in obviously the village attorney opinion. But it did make me wonder, why are we regulating this at all? And I would rather see us not regulating it. And it seems like the term overcrowding, like what does that even mean? And is it associated with, I could imagine at some point it was believed to be associated with health and, spreading of disease, but that's also not necessarily the case. 2 people can.
And I always assumed or thought that a lot of these things happen with respect to student housing, but it happened in
Yeah.
1956, I think, well before UWM was
Right.
even, close to having that being an issue. So I just think it was zoning practice in the 50s at the same time when we were, suburbanizing our urban cores to provide more parking. We were saying these same things with respect to that to, give people the illusion of, a different living environment that wasn't quote unquote urban.
Well, it was exclusionary zoning. It was done.
It's definitely,
locally.
yeah, and the same with space requirements. That's not something that we can enforce, and nor should we.
I was going to ask about that. I forgot that we did that with the, or is that, no, those are the old, this is residential. This is not something that we touched, right?
We have not looked at this in my time here, but this one that requires 2 occupants per bedroom, that if
225.7.
22570 references back, I believe, to household, but this is found in, sorry. This is found in 326F. Minimum space use and location requirements in our property standards.
There's also, oh, that's multifamily. What did you say? What was the site again? 220.
326.7F.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to get any historical perspective or social perspective on the space requirements, because it also seems like something we should not be attempting to regulate.
So does that minimum space requirement that covers everything? Like even if If you meet the definition of a family, right? You have 20 kids in your space, like, and they're all your children. You still have to meet the minimum space requirements?
I do not believe so.
Well, you'd probably have to move out.
Right. I probably would, but I'm wondering if like that's that's why the difference, right? And I don't think that's the issue it used to be.
I don't know that anyone would ever, well, I shouldn't say that, but so you're required to have 40 square feet of other floor area where someone theoretically could establish sleeping quarters. So if your bedrooms don't accommodate for the number of people in your dwelling unit, you need to have an additional 40 square feet for each additional occupant. That could be in a living room, a dining room, hallway or something. I don't know.
But are those occupants the non-related or the related?
So
Well-
this section does not get into the relationship status. It's a simple square footage per occupant, which I would argue is less exclusive and easier to enforce. But once again, if it's not something that we need to have in our code,
Right.
I'd be
yeah.
happy to look into this is not in a zoning code. This is in a building property standards code. So I would need to look at as to whether or not other communities have similar things and perhaps identify reasons when it was introduced. And if the end result is that we remove both of them or we are comfortable with one of them, once again, this is not a typical zoning issue. It's more of a legal thing. And I don't know where these have come from.
Yeah, so let me ask, so again, forgive me, I read through everything, but I'm still confused. So if my neighbor, first of all, is this an issue? Did someone bring this up as an issue or are we just addressing it to address it?
We brought it,
Okay,
the commission.
We
So-
brought it up because I believe we brought it up because we don't want someone to believe that it's something that the village would enforce, but yet it's on our books.
but so, like, let's say my neighbor starts, like, all of a sudden there's 14 people living in my neighbor's house and it meets the square footage requirement, right?
Mhm.
That would drive me nuts.
But is
Right?
it your business? Right.
Well, under this it is, right? Because I would go back and I would say, well, you don't meet any of these requirements, and I'd come and I'd complain to somebody
Gives
here.
you power.
Who would I complain to here?
You complained to
You'd
department.
come to our department and
Yeah, I'd
Timber-
come to
Timber
Mark and I'd be
Justin-
like, you're taxing my chickens $50, but my neighbor has 14 people living next door. I just,
Yeah.
I
let's
think there's a
follow.
lot behind this that it's not really an issue. Like, we're not enforcing it because we don't need to, but if we needed to and we get rid of it, that would suck. That'd just be my opinion.
We talk
Well-
about whether this is a one-way or two-way door. So if we change the rules and then became a problem, would every party would be grandfathered into
My neighbor.
with the 14 people? Would that be the consequence here, to Dan's concern?
Correct. If they've established themselves legally within a time when the code allowed it, they would be allowed to remain as a legal non-conforming
Okay.
dwelling unit if that's the case. So that's why I think we have, and I've been discussing in the office, this is kind of like a belt and suspenders kind of thing where in one instance, we quote unquote care about the relationship status, and one we care about the square footage. To me, the square footage is more agnostic to the people there. So if it's 14 people as, a 2-parent household with in-laws and a cousin and 4 kids, is that different or more acceptable than, 14 college students? And that's the question that I think goes towards the household definition, because in household, you can have more people related by blood, but that is based on more traditional standards, quote unquote, of what society has said was allowable as a family. But there are, chosen families and things of different statuses that have been excluded from that. And so that's why the APA's suggestion is to get rid of the reference to these things and find a different way to, regulate them. And that could be the minimum square foot standard.
Okay, can I try to put all the pieces together? Okay, so we have an old household definition, which we believe is problematic, and
Mhm.
doesn't particularly align with our comprehensive plan. Concerns around usage might be better addressed with minimum space requirements if we think that needs to be regulated at all. Did I
I would agree with that.
capture? Okay. Are there any other thoughts on this?
Well, we were talking about dropping the use of the word family, right? Make it more inclusive.
So we did do that within the commercial zoning update. We changed all districts that used to reference single family or two family to one household, two households. So I don't know that we got it clean, but we removed it as much as we could. And now we reference household where we used to reference family. So this definition used to be the definition of family. We switched that out 2 or 3 years ago, whenever that was, because once again, that's an outdated term. So we did change it to household definition, but we kept the definition as is. So if we are excluding groups of more than 3 people, is that something the village wants to, continue to have on the books?
So this household definition is the one we have now, the one I'm reading.
The one on the screen, correct, is the current
Oh, up
definition.
there too. Yeah, I mean, this seems to cover everything, right? It's an individual, right? Persons related by blood, marriage, adoption, guardianship, or a group of not more than 3 adults. I mean,
So if you had a 2-bedroom house with 4 unrelated adults, that would not be allowed based on this definition because there's more than 3. But if you had a household of 2 parents and 3 children, those 5 people would be acceptable. So is it acceptable in that same household to allow one of those units and not the other, is where this comes down to as a question. And it has been seen as an exclusionary thing with respect to, expecting households to look a certain way, but they don't always necessarily function that way. And I've referenced this many times, although I'm really not as accurate as I am, because I realize that Dorothy and Sophia are related, but the Golden Girls scenario, where there's 4 adults that have retired, into a house. Once again, in that case, it's not accurate because 2 are related, but if they were 4 unrelated, is that something the village
Concerned about?
is concerned about? And the Senior Resource Center did reach out to me several times, during other projects to say that we want to make sure that we have options for people to stay in their house. And if that means that they can rent out a room to someone or have someone help them support the taxes and the upkeep of their house, but if it's a 4th person that's not related, then they feel like they don't want to be, having to hide that.
Yeah. And what's the basis for 3, right?
Correct.
Why not 4?
And like I said,
Why
it
not
was
5?
2. It was 2 in 1956.
Yeah.
And we upped it to 3. I don't know where that came from, but yeah, what is the basis for 3?
but I think this is not trying to hammer anybody. Then it's not trying to go after the Golden Girls, right?
Mhm.
It's putting it in place for someone who wants to abuse it, right? And say, hey, I'm going to start renting this space out, right? And I'm going to have 4 adults in here. I think that'd be an issue if that was my neighbor, if they started just renting to random people.
But you'd still have all the other laws on the books that are, designed to, keep noise at a minimum. Anybody would still have to comply with noise codes and all the other things we have to kind of help people be better neighbors. Those would still be there.
Or it just definitely changes, like people said, parking, right? Like all of a sudden, again, all these other issues seem to deal, so it was just a household. And again, that could be adults, it could be kids, it doesn't matter. But it just seems to be changing the makeup a little of what our village typically is. And by the way, not for people who are using it the right way and being calm, things like that. But if you no longer have any way to go and say, hey, what's going on next door at my place?
UWM is a real thing down the
Yeah.
street,
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah.
That could change the character of the neighborhood and something we want to be thoughtful about, but don't need to.
So that's where falling back on the bedroom issue could be something, but if that's not seen as acceptable enough, I'm here for the comment. So once again, this is the Plan Commission initiative that I'm trying to, help you give information to see whether or not this is something that should be discussed or changed. I have heard, many times that people find this outdated and exclusionary with respect to what we find to be acceptable. People don't get married as early as ever as they used to, right? So 2 adults living together used to assume that they were married, right? Like now
That's okay under this, right?
two people, but two unmarried couples, no, is not okay.
That would be
Yeah.
4.
And that I think is outdated with the cost of housing and things like that. So one option is just to expand 3 to 4
Mhm.
in the first paragraph.
Correct. And we've done that from 2 to 3 in the past,
Mhm.
is for the number that we want to land on, or all relevant comments. Back to one of Dan's points, this has not been identified as an issue that we're enforcing. And so I think we could try to debate or define this in many ways, and it's not going to change the outcome of how
Mhm.
many things happen, but it could. So that's why
Mhm.
there's a need for discussion on it.
I guess one scenario that I'm thinking about is multi-generational groups that live together, but they would potentially be related by blood. But again, I'm just thinking about so I'm thinking of 2 specific cases, Dan, of where I know that, not to me on the board, but just being aware of a lot of criticism of some households. And both of them were situations where there was no noise, there was no litter. If you walked up and down the street, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell how many people were in the residential unit. But it was just the idea of it that bothered the neighbors. And there's something about knowing that someone on the block can go to the village and complain about somebody just because they're living a different way, but they aren't. I would much rather have things regulated through noise ordinance, those
Mhm.
quality of life ordinances,
I agree. Yeah.
rather than us regulating who you can live with. There's just something about it that doesn't sit right. And one was a situation where it was a different culture. Actually, both of them were situations where they were different families, but still drawing criticism, but for different reasons. So I'm coming from a place where I don't want to give power to critical neighbors just because they don't like people, or makes them uncomfortable, you know? So I don't know what the thought is and if that's making any sense.
Under this though, like, let's say we expanded that to 4,
Mhm.
right? 4 adults could be there with any number of their individual children too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're just starting to make a household as, by the way, people who are not abusing it's fine. But if you
Mhm.
start to just pack people into a place that meet this definition, then they don't have to meet the space requirements, right?
Mhm.
Because it says adults and any minor children related by blood. Wait, let me back up. It says any relationship plus any minor children related by blood. So like each
Mhm.
one of those 4 adults can have children with them.
Mhm.
You're just starting to multiply all this stuff, right? And by the way, do I think this is an issue? Probably not. But
Mhm.
I think it was written a certain way to make sure.
I wonder if it was the overcrowding piece had to do with protecting the housing stock, which is still exclusionary. That's like code for other things. But I'm thinking, okay, what happens because back in the day, big families did live in 2-bedroom bungalows.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there are families, like historically, there are people related by blood that were probably overcrowded. And like one of these situations that I was recalling, like that would have been technically, if they hadn't been blood related, it would have been an overcrowding situation. And um and again, yeah, house not being taken care of, but again, not violating any code. So I don't know. I just really, I know I'm not finishing sentences, but I struggle. I don't want to be pulled into being exclusionary for no good reason, you know,
Can we regulate the harms directly? Or do we,
the what?
whatever
Yeah.
harms we're concerned about, don't we have
Right.
more specific ways of going after those?
That's, yeah, could you give is
Sure.
that kind of what I
Nope.
was saying?
I think so,
before.
that like, hey, we don't need to take it at a household definition. We can just address that through more external manifestations, the things that we're actually worried about. So if we're worried about parking or noise, we regulate those things at those levels.
Mm-hmm. So for example, our parking, people aren't allowed to park cars on grass, right?
Correct. Or in their front yard.
Or
things
in
of
the
that
front
nature, right?
yard.
So yes, you can have an approved garage and approved parking slab, and then beyond that, it needs to be parking on the street.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? I know we're already at something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fully supportive of trying to remove the definition of what a family or household unit is to not be restrictive. Because I think families have changed quite a bit. And if our purpose for restricting is some idea of there's going to be a problem, I'm going to question why, right? Because you can have 4 unrelated people, doesn't make it a problem, right? If you're trying to, I think the reason why we had 2 and 3 was to keep college frat houses from showing up in Shorewood, if I could
Mhm.
say that.
Mm-hmm.
If we open it up to a frat house being allowed in Shorewood, is that a problem? Is it?
Probably.
I think
Yeah,
so.
who knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if frat house does not comport with noise, and at least not the ones I saw when I was in college, although that was a
Mhm.
long time ago.
Well, a lot of this is 2 people. It's not any noise, but people want to preserve property value too. And if you have a
Yeah.
frat house next door, you might not be as desirable as the place that doesn't, right?
Yeah. or
And
having
if you have a place that has, again, like the Wicklands have a bunch of kids, right? At some point, I feel bad for my neighbors. My kids get to drive, and hopefully they get to buy their own car. Like it's going to be a packed house, right? And that's drives some people nuts. It's about maintaining the peace, not necessarily anyone can do anything about it or it's wrong.
Mhm.
I mean, I even feel bad for people with that. So, I just packing,
But putting your definition of family on something doesn't make it
not my
any
definition
different.
of family at all.
right.
I like the definition of household that's in here, right? And it has nothing to do with a typical family unit. I mean, at least it doesn't
Well,
read
the
that way.
3 unrelated people.
Or it
First.
limits it to a particular size.
Yeah, it's requiring people to be married by blood that I think is the questionable thing.
Well, I think people would rather limit maybe even the amount of family that could live there, but that's a tough one. Someone owns a house and they have children. You can't say, you got to leave.
Well, there's houses here that are gigantic, right?
Can't make anybody leave. We just
Your grandfather didn't, but what if you have more kids?
I
That's
do need to
awkward. That's
understand
another person.
the interplay, just because once again, we have not enforced it to my knowledge. I need to understand the interplay of the minimum space requirements and the definition, our current definition. So yes, if there was a conforming household that did not have adequate space per the space, what would we do on that? I highly doubt that we would have any standing to make someone move. I don't know. We've always, in my understanding, we've always relied on the 2 together. And I believe, like I said, the one time that we enforced it recently would have been 4 unrelated adults living in a 2-bedroom apartment that was technically, I believe, or maybe a 1-bedroom that was too small. I don't know the full details on that. And this is why I think these are great discussions, because I need to understand, your perspectives on how this all works. And I need to understand it myself, because as I said, this is not the day-to-day actions of my department. So understanding them before we move on to any sort of engagement or recommendation, I think really is critical, that we're on the same page first, at least understanding the topic.
Would it be okay to suggest some directions for next steps, or
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd be happy to
Yeah.
take direction.
can we have some options here? I would love one, Tracy,
Go ahead.
where we remove the household definition completely, and if we are going to regulate it, we regulate it through minimum space requirements per person, and that would achieve a lot of the same ends. Also open to even a less restrictive approach where we try to regulate the harms specifically. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Mhm.
I'm interested in the legal definition requirements.
We did have a hand raised in the chat. I don't know if we're taking public comment or not, but I just want to make sure that was.
Oh, thank you for, Trustee McGovern, are you having any thoughts or any next steps?
No. I mean, I'd prefer to just, change the definition and focus on things we're trying to avoid, like excess noise and so on.
Mm-hmm. So for an exercise for the group, I think if we were gonna, I know that this body does not regulate harms. However, if we made a list of harms that we could potentially see as being feared, then I think that that would be very instructive, moving forward. So I think if we're not going to do that tonight, we should make a note of doing it in the future. Or do you want to add any?
Would we, I'm just, would we be, I don't want to break any rules. Can we just send some ideas to Bart and we can follow up in the
Yes.
next meeting on this?
Yes. And then from my perspective, my concern about the space requirements is, again, I don't know how you enforce that. So bringing some scenarios, and it also, I don't know why 40 feet would be the magic number. A lot of our housing stock is pretty small or limited. So some information background and then other municipalities, are they regulating these things? And then with that, I would take a comment or question. There's something in the chat.
Nope, that's old. It looks like.
Okay.
But she just let her hand raise. It looks like.
Okay. Ms. Kylie Miller, do you have a question or comment? We are gathering information at this time.
Yeah, it seems, and I think you've covered most of my thoughts in one way or another. It seems like if this is the village's desire, you want to differentiate between, discouraging student housing, the kind probably many of us lived in, where you've got, each half of a duplex has 6 students in it, versus a large extended family of multiple generations. And, in these economic times when your adult children return home after school, or you have an elderly parent living with you. So I think, and that might be something Bart and our village attorney have to wrestle with, is how can you allow one, but not allow the other? I think that's the tricky part.
Thank you.
Because we've had students live across the street, and we could tell you when the bars closed because then they got activated at home and had a drug bust and all that. So, I mean, we've seen, you can tell when you are a little bit south of UWM, oh, that's student housing. And when you have non-owner occupied rental properties, whether it's here or in Madison or any college town, it's sort of what Commissioner Wicklund was saying, that you don't want your property values to go down because, every semester, every year, you have more students coming in and out. So, I can see wanting to discourage that, or fraternity houses, but yet encourage, larger family groups, whether it's, a nuclear family or extended family. So that might be a legal question for Nathan.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
In terms of public engagement, Bart, is there anything pertaining to the Plan Commission as to our obligation to seek public input? Because I know that there's communication around rezoning, for example. But in this case, is there anything in our policy or
Not with
procedures?
respect to the Plan Commission, at a minimum, anything in the zoning chapter that gets updated needs to have a public hearing in front of the village
Right.
board. And so I would just rely on public engagement to help you form a recommendation. And then once again, the village board's a whole different discussion. If the village board wanted additional engagement, they could ask us for that as well. But in terms of the Plan Commission, My expectation would be that you ask for public engagement to help you make your recommendation, but it's not technically required.
We're considering multiple things. Maybe we get them all teed up and then we have an open house or something.
Yeah, I was thinking because with the zoning code update for commercial district, there was an open house. And so if these are the four, if now we're looking at a different aspect of our code being residential, it seems like doing something similar would make sense. And that would, I think the village board would appreciate having that done for them. And then if there's additional, but not waiting until it gets to the public, to the village board for the first public input. So that leads us to structure, which means maybe what we want to do is take one of these issues for the next 4 meetings, or try to do 2, but we're already at 7:40, so I don't know what the appetite is. To study these, generate ideas and questions, and plan for a forum in September.
Yeah, I think the fall's a good time. In the
Mhm.
summer, people, don't necessarily have the
Yeah,
desire to
oh,
draw.
definitely
Yeah.
not. And I don't think we can get through them. I'd hate to force us to sit for, 4 hours and go through potential policy scenarios. I don't think that's a great use of anyone's time. Checking with the commissioners, would you, at our next 2 meetings, we won't have any unless we have any applications.
We're not required to meet, but I would ask that we try
We-
to stay on top of it. I
Yeah.
can tell you I'm not available at our regular scheduled June meeting. So if we get something, we would need to reschedule the June meeting. Otherwise, we're looking at July for the next time we're together.
Okay. Why don't you and I work on agenda setting?
Okay.
And I would take any final input from the commission as far as, would you like to try to take 2 policy study issues each night for the next 2 meetings so that we can be ready for an open house in a forum in the fall? Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I think so. I
Okay.
think we wanted to move, we want to bring one to the board each time, and we thought maybe the basements was the simplest thing. The basement living spaces. or
Is that
bedrooms.
one even controversial?
I didn't think.
We don't know
household
until we
was.
talk about it.
Oh, okay, all right. Want to make sure I'm not missing something.
We thought that was something we could do quickly, and I
Mhm.
think it helps any homeowner that currently has a space that they may be using, and now they can count it as an extra bedroom.
Mhm.
Bart,
The
is
housing
there
stock.
one that comes up in your office more frequently than the others of the 4 proposals?
ADUs is the only one that comes up in my office because once again, we don't necessarily get a lot of calls or
Right.
complaints about these other issues. Bedrooms and basements comes up with the building inspecting department. When people do renovations, we just simply say you can't put in a closet and you can't call it a bedroom. People will still renovate their basement.
Right.
And how they use it, is a different story. But if we get a complaint on it, we would say, you can't have a bed down here. But once we leave the inspection process, we don't get complaints on these things.
That was I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, the one thing that we do get, because we can't solve it with, a loophole of removing a label on a plan, accessory dwelling units is the one that we can't, there's no current workaround, and we get a handful of those a year. Primarily when someone rebuilds their garage, they want to maximize the potential of rebuilding that garage, and we currently say you can't do that. Or when someone's, parent or spouse or someone needs an additional, unit on their property, we tell people you can't do that. So of the 4 issues, that's the only one that I hear. But the other ones exist, but we're just not getting complaints about them.
So maybe we should do that one next. I'm just kind of thinking in terms of prioritizing.
Yeah.
They're all important, but
Well, I think what we were thinking of doing is that the plan commission reviews all 4 of them. And then we have an open house or a public forum in the fall where we get input from the public on all
Okay.
4 of those things before they would go to the village board. And I think that the ADUs, being that that's the most, technically probably the most complicated, I think we should take that one at study phase next. And then also the same night, do basements. And then what's the third one?
Duplex restrictions within the R6 district.
Mhm. Well, we could try to take all three next time, but I mean, I don't want to get into too much of the technical thing, but I think it is important because I can imagine the village board wanting public input on all of these things.
Yeah.
And so I think we should do one round of public input before anything goes to the board for possible consideration.
And I'm always fine including all four in there as far as they are
Sure.
and how much time we have and how much energy we have to discuss them could be just up to the board at the time. I wasn't expecting households to take, the 45 minutes that it has. So I don't, maybe the other ones will take even longer. I don't know, but I think giving you the information and seeing how much time we have in the meeting to get through it, that's a fine working method for me.
Mhm. Let's plan on meeting 90 minutes at least for the next meeting so that we can possibly get through all the policies so that we are gathering information so that then they can bring it back with more detail.
And we'll be meeting in June then?
We
No,
would
we'll
need to poll for a special meeting in
We'll
June.
try to pull for a special meeting. Yeah, if possible, I would like us to be able to meet.
Great.
Okay. All right. And any eager beavers who would like to read ahead and send comments to Director Griepenschlag on their own, especially if they're going to be traveling, that would be fine too, because we have all the information in the packet. All right. Do we have anything else to cover on the agenda?
I mean, I do have the additional slides, but it sounds like we're going to hold off on those. We only got through the household. I do have slides on the other three items. I'm fine holding on them, but if you
Oh.
want me to introduce what I had, I'd be
Just email the packet.
ready.
I love your.
I mean, the slides reflect what's in the packet. It just gives you opportunity to respond to that information with direction or more questions. So
I
once again,
apologize.
if you're fine to give me that direction or question outside of meetings, I am always happy to take it. If you want to set up a meeting with me, I'm happy to take that as well. I just
Okay.
can't do it as a body.
I failed as chair and not being clear about how much we were going to accomplish and how long we were going to meet tonight. So is there a will to, is there interest in adjourning at this time and then planning to cover the other three items at the next meeting? Or would you like to take one more discussion item tonight?
I was throwing the basement thing because I read that pack and I'm like, this is dumb. Why don't we just move past this? And maybe everyone goes, no, we should discuss it more. But I thought that
Oh.
would be like the quickest item.
Okay,
I'm good
around
with
the
that.
horn.
I'm good with that.
I can stay longer.
Basements.
Okay, let's do
Basements it
basements.
is.
So is there anybody who has reservations on changing the code about basements?
Not sure what it's going to accomplish, but sure. Go for it.
So once again, it's a very brief introduction. It was prohibited the 1956 municipal code rewrite. I provided that forward to that code where it said, the village spent a year and had its building inspector, add a lot of things in there. I can't find specific reference to why that was added. We are unaware of other prohibitions. We did call Whitefish Bay. We kind of got a chuckle from them saying that's in there. Why? What? So I had never heard of it anywhere I had worked or in anything that I've done. And so yeah, we currently prohibit a basement from being there, despite the fact that the building code would protect life safety issues through adequate egress, light, ventilation, and smoke alarms. So as I mentioned, we do get plans that show renovated basements, and we require that they take the label off of there and that they remove the closet so it doesn't conform to the standards of a bedroom. But we believe fully that as soon as we leave, people are using them in that way. That's really as simple as I had. The next steps would be discussion and direction to proceed from the plan commission. Once again, getting the village attorney opinion as to why they think this could be defended to be kept, public engagement, and then we would simply draft a change for recommending to remove that section from the code.
Is there anything a homeowner would have to do if they had a room in their basement?
Already, they don't have to register it, right?
If it was existing before the code, that would be allowed. I don't know that it would be. So if they installed it without permits, we would make them remove it if they didn't get permits for it as unpermitted work. So once again, it's in the code. We review the plans to make sure that people are not installing things that conform to the definition of basement. So if someone installed a room that they then added a closet, or they then added something that made
Was
it,
not permitted.
it would not have been a permitted installation.
Okay.
So yeah, we used to
So-
have a code compliance program. When you sold your house, we would go through your house to make
Right.
sure it conformed. That's no, we don't do that anymore.
Right.
So we don't inspect houses unless we have a project to get in to inspect for. So as I said, once the plan gets signed off on, if that house never has a permit for the next 20 years and they function as a bedroom for the next 20 years, there's no way for us to know. And I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that's the reality of
And when
how this
someone
functions.
goes to sell their house, they can now list it as 5 bedrooms instead of 4 because they have one in the basement.
When if we change the code,
If we
Mm, but
change the
not
code.
currently.
So right now,
Oh.
when they do it, the assessor does get record of all permits. And so if you add a bedroom, the assessor adds a bedroom. But if you don't add a bedroom, the assessor does not add a bedroom to it. They might say finished basement space, but they're not saying it's a 4-bedroom house now.
This is what I was getting to in terms of what does this actually change? I love the
Yeah.
idea of making, people are going to live in basements. We should make them safe and have egress and stuff like that. But if you're going to get into the tax implications, isn't everybody going to have a bed in a basement without a closet and it's not a room?
You would have to conform to the code with respect to egress. So adding an egress window is not a simple thing for a lot of people.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you wanted to have a bedroom in a basement and you conform to the building code, then we would say, yes, this is a basement, and the assessor would add it to your assessed roll as a bedroom. Right now, it's being added as finished space, is my understanding.
That's what I'm like, I think I'm open to doing it. I've got 100% vote yes for me, but I just don't think anybody's going to pick you up on it. But
I see what you're saying. Okay. So for that matter, now I'm going to go back on, yeah, I think the next step would be to check with village attorney and then bring a draft change for us to consider.
Mhm.
And I think that about household as well, based on, or maybe some options or something. I don't, and now I see your point, trustee McGovern, about, is this really something that we need to have a public forum about? Because it's pretty wonky. So I'm going to go back on ADUs. We definitely need to have a public forum. The duplex, I'm going to have to refresh my memory on that. So we'll take that last, but at our next meeting, let's take ADUs and duplex, and then bring 2 draft changes on the previous 2 items. And if those 2, well, we'll work on the agenda and maybe we'll bring them sooner, but we only have 2 meetings in this. All right, sorry for all this thinking out loud, guys. Good process work. Motion to adjourn,
Second.
by
Oh,
Commissioner, okay,
I'll motion to adjourn, sure.
Commissioner Klein, seconded by
No,
Commissioner
but-
Pollak. Any objections? We stand adjourned at 7, what time is it? 7:52. All right. For a minute, I thought you guys were village board. That's why I was like, we gotta adjourn. These guys
I
can't.
need to figure out how to stop recording.
If we go longer than 40 minutes now, I get